Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of In Focus, and today we're joined by Gabrielle Earnshaw, who is mobile strategy and engineering consultant. Hi Gabby, how are you doing?
Hi, good, thanks, Osman. How are you doing?
Not bad, thank you, not bad. Thanks for taking the time for joining us, and yeah, really looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really excited to talk as well.
Good. So I'll start how we always start. What, in your opinion, is the most interesting or exciting thing about working in tech at the moment?
Well, I think that's probably going to be a really boring answer because I'm guessing a lot of people are saying the same thing at the moment. I think you know what it's going to be. It is AI, of course. So just suddenly, the possibilities of what we can do with tech, what we can do as a single person, as a single team, that's just kind of exploding now. So much change and so many new fun toys to play with as well. If you kind of in the engineering and tech circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know some people had a preview of it, but are you talking mainly about like Copilot being released more recently, or are there wider things that you've seen are actually starting to be used a bit more? Because it does seem it's a bit like exponential, the uptake on this type of thing, in that it doesn't seem that long ago that we were first trying a little bit of chat GPT and that type of stuff, and it seems to have really like just moved on massively, but time hasn't moved on massively.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's only about a year, isn't it, since the first release, and like it wasn't something that I really saw coming either. But yeah, on all fronts, really. I mean, the tools that we've got on the engineering side are pretty good. I think it kind of cycles around. Sometimes we think, well, this is going to change everything, and then it's like, well, okay, this is like an assistant. I use it a lot if I'm dabbling, particularly if I'm looking at code bases that I'm not very familiar with or languages. It's really easy to just summarize stuff and fix little things and get it to help you write your tests. But I think really, like the exciting bit, it for me is more on what you can do with it in the product side. So a lot of it, a year ago, it was really kind of tentative and early adopter stuff, but now we're starting to see people building some really interesting tools with it. And like, so from my point of view with the app side of things, I'm thinking about you can build yourself a bot that can answer questions in an app. Can bring characters to life in an app. I've seen people doing prototypes where you can tell it the tone that you want and whether or not it's the characteristics of this little character, and people can bring it to life and then talk to the character that they've made. Obviously that's kind of in an entertainment space, but then you think of how you can apply that to like every aspect really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting you talk about like the bots and the app sort of function there, because there's this whole debate that'll continue on for the rest of time. Is AI going to take our jobs and that type of stuff? I don't think it is. But back in the day, well, not even back in the day, a few years ago, it would have been a team's job to create one of those bots, usually probably for an insurance company or something like that, where you end up going around in circles, getting really frustrated and thinking, actually, it's not that important, I'll just leave it. But I think it's forcing more. What it's going to force is more innovation. And you're gonna have to get cleverer with what we're trying to do, but also it's almost like, well, that isn't complicated anymore, so that now brings up the norm or the standard expectation of what you should have, which then forces you to look in. Well, it depends on which way you view it. You're either being forced to do it or you're being given the opportunity to do it, and that depends on whether you're I suppose, AI skeptic or an AI promoter.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the key thing, like you said, is the innovation, and I think innovation goes in cycles, and I think there'll be some people who don't want to run with it and don't want to adopt it, and I think they'll perhaps do other things, whereas other innovators will step up into that. So I think on an individual level, whether or not you want to get involved in it, is kind of moot. I mean, you don't have to, but other people will. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I see that. I mean, and I'm by no means an early adopter or even really a late adopter. I'm kind of watching it with interest and waiting for those tools to filter through. I'm certainly not on the wave of driving this through, but yeah, it's just really exciting to see what people come up with.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting. I think it probably will take all of our jobs in the long term. Hopefully not. Hopefully not for a while. Hopefully not until I finish having a job. But yeah, I just think the power of it is so vast. I think you can already see kind of areas where it's the expertise has been kind of wiped out overnight. Anything that involves digesting a lot of information, spotting edge cases, and expertise in how to interpret that information, I think that's certainly something that does look in danger, really. Although notwithstanding, at the moment, ChatGPT just likes to throw in a few curveballs. So at the moment, it needs a lot of babysitting. But I guess that will come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously we've got to know each other fairly well over the past year at various events that we've been running. But for anyone that's listening that doesn't know, let's go into your background and your career to date and sort of how you got to where you are at the moment, if that's all right. So just describe for us what it is you're doing now, and then we'll go back.
Yeah, so what it is I'm doing now, as you said at the start, I'm a specialist in mobile app engineering and strategy. So that is really where I see myself is everything that takes mobile app from kind of idea to being out with end users, all of that bit in the middle, all of that pipeline, all of that dev workflow, architecture, code, automation, team culture, everything in the middle. That's kind of my specialism, building that, and the other bits that kind of segue in the strategy around how to make successful mobile apps. And I'm doing that freelance now, which I've been doing since about May this year. So I'm fairly new to kind of being an independent consultant. And I do bits and pieces of small strategy projects with companies. So, people who maybe looking for what technology they should use, whether they should switch to another technology, like how to get things unstuck. And I'm also working as a fractional CTO. So I have a role with a really nice company called Bearable, who make a nice app product for people who have chronic health conditions. And I worked with them full time as their CTO for a year, and I now do that fractionally, so 1 or 2 days a week. And I'm looking to kind of I've worked with a few clients over this last 6 months, and I'm kind of building up a portfolio and looking to work with more people. So that's where I am now. How I got there, it's kind of a long and winding story, really, in that I've always really just looked to do things that looked interesting. I've never had like a grand plan or I did engineering at uni. Let me remember, metallurgy, economics and management was the full title of the degree. I did that at Oxford. So I've always had a bit of a slant on that kind of business and strategy side. And I had this vague notion, this was back around 2000. I had this vague notion that technology and banking was going to be a big thing, which turns out I was right. Fintech, as we now call it. So I thought, right, I'm going to get a job in technology and banking. Didn't really know what that meant, and I ended up being a risk analyst for a bank, for National Australia Group, who owned I think they owned Yorkshire Bank, Clydesdale, a couple of others around and about. And it turned out it was the most boring job in the world to me. It was all kind of running reports and spreadsheets. I was a real whiz with spreadsheets. But I kind of got the bug for programming, because we used to spend a day, we rotated around the team, but every week just building this massive report, and it was really dull. So I just kind of got this idea that I could learn to program and automate it. So that's what I did. I'd done bits of programming, like I programmed spectrums, and I was one of those who was kind of writing code at 5, unfortunately. But so I taught myself how to automate it, and did a little bit of this automation work, a little bit of running this report, and then within a few weeks, I just kind of pressed the button and it just kind of did it. And I thought, oh, this is great. Like I liked that idea. You can program, and instead of doing the actual work, you've got time to go to the pub or whatever, or you don't have to miss lunch anymore because you've got these reports to do. So that's where it started, really. And I thought, right, this is much better than the day job that I'm doing. So I just kind of bought a load of books, learned how to program, blagged a programming job, and then the rest of the day is history. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was quite lucky to get roles at places where they did things kind of right. So I learned how to program properly. You know, like people say to me now, "Oh, so you're self-taught." And I suppose that back then I was, but I wouldn't consider myself to be, you know, self-taught now. You know, I'm a proper engineer now, I would say. So yeah, so that's the early days of how I got into programming.
No, that's great. And just delving in a little bit, because obviously there's this big thing in the industry at the minute that it's a male dominated industry. The numbers are still, I think it's like 84% male in a lot of the IT focused roles out there. But you were playing around with coding at like the age of 5, you said. So like, where do you think that came from, or what was it? You know, it's just you happened to be interested in it. Was it encouraged by your parents at that time, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the honest answer to that is I've always been a bit of a tomboy, really. So as well as playing with computers, I was also climbing trees, and I was also doing judo, and you know, like a lot of other things that were kind of male dominated. So
Mm.
I suppose that's just something I was doing. I mean, I was really lucky at home. My dad was interested in computers, and then the ZX Spectrums came out, and you know, they were an accessible, affordable way to, you know, to kind of have access to a computer. And they had these great books. Some people out there will remember them, you know, like, and they were the, you know, like shiny hardback books, and they had these like programs that you could write, and they promise, you know, like the blurb just promised these great things of robots and explosions and shooting, and you know, you'd spend ages typing it in, and it wouldn't really work, and even if it did, it wasn't. You know, like I was expecting graphics, and you know, like I don't know how I was expecting that in kind of 50 lines of code, but so yeah, so I was just kind of really hooked on that. But you know, I think it was male dominated. I didn't even know it was a thing that you could do. So I didn't do
Mm.
computer science at uni because I didn't know that it was an option, really.
Mm.
So it was really just by luck of kind of getting into it. And yeah, it has always been. I mean, even now, you know, it's obviously, you know, like women in tech is a thing now, and you know, it's not unusual to see a woman planning team. We've got at Bearable now. We've got. I think there are 4/5 women out of a team of less than 10. You know, so you know, like, but that's just kind of come recently. But
Mm.
you know, it's fantastic really now. You know, when I'm interviewing so many kind of female candidates for roles, it's great to see that change around. But yeah, it has been a long time coming. And yeah, computer games. I used to like playing computer games, and that again was very male dominated. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's interesting. It's just it's good to sort of find how people got on their journey to various places and seeing, well, is it something we're missing? Is this something we can replicate? You know, and bring more balance, I suppose. But speaking of how you got onto a journey, then you know, you're a very mobile focused consultant at the moment, almost exclusively, dare I say. Where did that start? Where did, you know, mobile development and engineering become a thing? And when were you aware of it, I suppose, first in your career, that this might be a big thing? And
yeah. So again, really just by accident. So I had done bits and pieces of like things with really early mobile devices. So things like Palm Pilot, which
I
I
think I've
can
seen
I
a
can't
picture of
even
one before. I've never held one.
yeah, I can't even really remember what it was like. I think it was like a weird sort of flip lid pencil case thing. And I, you know, like so I am I'm typically very bad at predicting the future. I said MP3s would never catch on. I said these mobile things, these are never going to catch on. You know, like why would you use this little, you know, hard to use thing when you could use this big screen? But yeah, I had an opportunity and a job I was in to just do a bit of work on you know, creating a new well, I mean, an app. It wasn't an app then; it was you know, I don't even know what we called them then. But anyway, for this thing, and it was
Mm.
quite interesting. But again, you know, it was just kind of by the wayside, really. And then iPhones came out, and I think that was really the game changer.
Mm.
And I think the thing that I really loved is that I've always really been more focused on back end, and I still now. If I was coding, I would be much happier coding on the back end than the front end.
Mm.
Um, but there was something about it, like I've worked on all these kind of banking systems, trading systems, oil systems, whatever. And there was something about being able to hold it in your hand, and point out and say, I did this, like you can't explain what you've done in the back end of a trading system.
Mhm.
So yeah, I had an iPhone, and it was back well over 10 years ago now. I was at BJSS, and they had a piece of work come in that was just, I think it was just really a code review, just like a due diligence of a
Mm.
mobile code base. And then someone basically said, "Oh, you've got an iPhone. Do you want to look at this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." So I did it. And, it was just code.
Mm.
And it wasn't that long after that that I saw a job for a mobile developer advertised. And it was advertised in Leeds. I've always really worked in Leeds. And when
Mm.
I kind of applied and looked, it was actually in Huddersfield, which is where I live. So it was kind of like fate, really.
Yeah.
So and then the rest is history. Yeah, just absolutely loved it. Loved working on it, and like I said, I'm more focused on back end. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that mobile does have, it's kind of a full stack within that platform. So there's the front end stuff, and back end in there. And then yeah, just really picked it up and ran with it. Obviously, it's gained popularity. So nowadays, yeah, I'm more focused on the mobile side of the tech, but also the stuff that goes around it. So very kind of light touch on the kind of solutions architecture that sits behind that.
Mm.
But like if I was building, like if it was a really big product where mobile was just one piece in it, I probably wouldn't get that involved in the back end. Whereas if it's kind of a mobile focused product, I'd probably do a bit more of that kind of back end and adjacent tech. But
Yeah,
um,
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you touch on a great point there, because I had the first iPhone as well, and I remember, I mean, the apps you could get were, I assume everyone had it. The beer drinking app that, as you lifted the
yeah,
phone up, the level changed. That blew my mind.
yeah,
But it went from, I think it took, maybe that was the catalyst. I don't know. It was for me because it was the first time I was experiencing it, from IT and tech being something that was a service to transitioning. And you mentioned it a couple of times when you were talking there, into mobile being a product and your app being a product, not just this is something that's going to connect you to a big computer somewhere so you can see what you would have seen on your computer. So, how quickly was that sort of distinction made into, well, I suppose this is a wider question than just mobile, but from a mobile perspective, we're now talking about products. We're not talking about sort of, this is just tech that runs something.
yeah, that's right. I don't know how quickly that transition was. It's one of those things that, like, standing here now and you look back and you see that there was that very obvious transition.
Mm.
But like in my first early roles in tech, you said that you worked in a software house, and the company building those, what we would now call products, called themselves software houses.
Mm.
And it really was all about that, like the process of what you're doing, not what you're going to end up with. So nowadays we're all very outcome focused. It's all around, kind of the product, the user, what are we going to get out at the end. Whereas it was very focused on, like
Mm.
these are the things that we're going to do, this is the code we're going to make, this is the tech we're going to use. And like almost as a byproduct, something's going to pop out at the other end that people will use and hopefully buy. But there
Yeah.
just really wasn't that kind of focus. But nowadays you would see, if I look at kind of available roles in mobile,
Mm.
many of them are for what they call product engineers. So it's someone who builds a product, rather than like less of it is, we want like an analyst engineer, or like it's
Mm-hmm.
very different. But yeah, and I guess that's born out of just the results that you can achieve if you're just focusing on the way you're building the tech.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to build it in a great way, but what comes out at the end, you're not really focusing on that, you're not optimizing that. So again, it's this thing about innovation, that all those companies that were there doing that, I guess a lot of them didn't change, and then the innovators come through, and still now you see these product companies who are really focused
Mm-hmm.
on those outcomes, and what we're actually going to build for the users, rather than just the let's build some tech because it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it probably took some really big success stories for people to realize, oh, hang on, like apps are a thing in their own right, as opposed to they're just an offshoot of, I can use this app, but really all it's showing me is a smaller web page of what I would have seen on the internet anyway, and that type of thing. And actually, they're a thing on their own. But I suppose that brings us on to a little bit where, the is there a distinct advantage if you're creating an app from an idea that has nothing to do with anything else? And I'll give you an example of, I suppose, the opposite of that is if you're an existing company with an idea, or not with an idea, with an existing business, it runs on the internet, or you've got a product that runs on the internet, are you more likely to develop that app wrong because you're trying to shoehorn it into the technology that you've already got, and maybe looking at it from a tech first point of view as opposed to a product first point of view? And this might be delving into some of the things you see as a consultant, how people go about actually, where's the starting point for, well, we know we want this app, but do you start with, well, this is where we're starting with in our existing system and we're going from there? And that's where I suppose me, who isn't in IT, doesn't have an existing system to offshoot from, is that an advantage or a disadvantage? Because I could still make the same amount of mistakes.
Yeah, I guess it works. It works both ways. So, so if you're not a company, if you're just someone and you've got this idea for this product, it's likely that you're going to be great on the product, but know nothing about tech. So
Yeah.
there's, you've got a clean sheet of paper to start with, but you can quite easily go quite wrong with that, really.
Mm.
And in the startup world, it's really difficult because you have to take off that runway as quickly as possible,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise you kind of crash and burn. But you also have to be careful because if you take off too quickly, then you're kind of coming back down again.
Mm.
And I have seen that where there's such a rush to get out quickly that things have been done badly and not engineered well, and like
Mm.
it then takes like literally years to come back from that, if at all. Everything is moving more slowly,
Mm.
and I think a lot of that is just luck. It's the look of who you get building it in the first place, because if you get someone who can go quickly whilst using good practices, then you're in much better hands, really, than someone who can build quickly without using good practices, or someone who really knows how to use good practices but can't build quickly. You've got to strike that balance.
Yeah.
So over on the other side, though, if you look at kind of an enterprise that they need an app, they do tend to look at it more from the technology perspective. So I have a lot
Mm.
of conversations around which tech should we be using for this, and it's kind of missed out all of the product stuff. And
Mm.
especially in a big organization, there can be quite a disconnect from someone who said, right, we need an app, and then that comes through various levels of kind of product managers, product owners, and then it kind of hits the technology team.
Mm.
And joining those dots back up of what they actually need and why is quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the key thing is any app to be viable needs two things. It needs user engagement, so it needs people using that app, logging in, looking at it, interacting with it, and it needs a business model. So you need to be able to take that user engagement and somehow turn that into money. Essentially, it's not always
Mm.
it's not always money. Sometimes it's cost saving, but it's surprising how often businesses don't actually know what the business model is for their app. So it's dead easy if you say bearable. So that as I said, that's a product for people with chronic health conditions, and that's a subscription service.
Mm.
It's dead easy with that one. You can see you provide the value to the user, and they will pay a monthly subscription for the people who benefit from that premium. So that business
Mm-hmm.
model is dead easy. It's all about subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at something like Amazon, that's pretty easy as well. Log in, buy stuff, send stuff out. People are paying for stuff.
Yeah.
But where it starts to get a bit hazier are things like what I would call service access. So you're a bank, and you provide an app for people to use. So there's no like direct money there. So
Mm.
it gets a little bit hazier. You know that you want people to keep using it because that means that they liking your service and they'll stay with you for a longer time.
Yeah.
But it requires more effort then to follow that value stream and work out, like, how is your business model turning that user engagement into value?
Yeah.
If you give someone like Starling or Monzo, you're going to put a lot of effort into having the slickest app and the best service, and you need to spend a lot of money on that. If you're someone like Barclays, like I guess they're competing more with that, but at first it was enough just to have an app. As long as it worked, as long as it's solid, as long as it's trustworthy, it's kind of a slightly different business model. So yeah, and some of them are even more complicated. Then you get things like B2B products. So, like you're providing a service to a business, and as part of that, you provide an app for the people who work in that business to do their jobs. And then you've got this weird kind of B2B to kind of C, because you kind of got, even though you're doing your job, it's often on mobile, it's on someone's own device now. It's quite rare really to have the kind of managed devices. So and where is your business model there? So where does the value come from? Because people have got to use it, but if enough of them don't like it, then you're likely to lose the business. And is it just an add-on? Is it a key driver? So there's all that sort of stuff really, which is where I kind of come in and try and direct organizations to be thinking about that before you even get anywhere near the tech. The first thing is what's your business model. And then the second thing with mobile really is it's about user engagement, and mobile really gives you some heavyweight tools for kind of driving that user engagement. So things like, the big thing is distribution. So if you create an app, you can get it to pretty much anyone on the planet. You do kind of pay a little bit for that, but it's kind of for most people good value. So you've got that distribution. You've got the icon on the home screen, which kind of brings people back into like you kind of browse on your phone. Oh, look, there's a thing I'll do. You remember the product, you remember the brand. And then the big one really is notifications. So you can just reach into someone's pocket and tap them on the shoulder and say,
"Oh, no,
engage with this app." So so then it's about looking at how much of that do you need. Because if you're a B2B to C type product, maybe you don't need so much of that engagement because people are already using that. It's their job, so they have to use it. So you don't have to put as much effort into that level of engagement. But if you're someone like Duolingo is my favorite example at the moment of kind of using those tools for user engagement, because they just they use every trick in the book, absolutely every single one. And it's a great one to talk about as well, because it's kind of a good, it's a product for good. It kind of it's a learning tool. But yeah, so if you're going to kind of fire everything at that engagement, then that's where you really need the kind of the slick UI UX and the kind of more kind of native end of the feel of things. So that's really what it's based on. How much money, how much value are you going to derive from this, and how much effort are you going to need to put into that value? And that's where you can start looking at what kind of tech platforms are going to be most optimal, I suppose, for your use case.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. So in terms of then, I suppose the people who you speak to on a daily, monthly, weekly, monthly basis, how many of them would you say fall into the category of, we've got this idea, we know it's a mobile thing and we need help sort of figuring it out and that type of thing, versus we think we need an app, we don't really know why, but everyone's got an app and we should have an app? Like, is that still a thing these days?
It is still a thing, and it is kind of surprising, really. But yeah, when I talk to people, they've usually got an app or they're in the process of building an app, but they're often not sure why. So even established companies, I'll quite often say, so where does value come from this app? And I quite often just get kind of quite a confused look at that. So because it is like, when you're kind of in your tech niche, if you like, it's it's quite difficult to get out of that. And I suppose that's really, like in the, I'm a fractional CTO, I've been a CTO, and it's really that, I see the CTO role is really connecting the tech to the value in the business. So it really is kind of bridging that. And yeah, I do like that. That's the perspective that I can bring to it. But again, it does very much fall down the lines of enterprise versus startup. So startups are really, like they know exactly, how they want to engage their audience. Nowadays, they tend to know what the business model is. Like in the early days, it used to be just like, let's get as many users as possible, and then I mean, Duolingo again is another, another example for them, but they famously didn't have a business model, but they had a lot of users, and really, I think nowadays investors need more than just users generally. So it's not a great strategy, but also it is one of those, biggest fish wins type scenarios where it is, if you just go for having the users, there's a good chance that you're not gonna make it to the top. Whereas if you've got a sound business model, you can grow. So it's both really. I mean, like on the startup side, it's a much more about what are your goals, what are you looking to achieve, and then looking to line up, because the familiarity with tech isn't there as much. It's much more like, well, okay, this is what we're going to need, this is what we're going to need in the stack, this is where we're going to start to need to transition so that you can do those things in the future, because otherwise you'll get there and it'll be kind of too late. But then on the enterprise side of things, it is much more, like we're building this app, oh, what now? It is a bit like how do we get, it's about getting that kind of solid strategy in place of often people have already picked their tech, and that's fine. There's still a lot of other things, like how you I always say, like, in the tech stack, there are three important things that you really need to be able to do. You need to be able to ship, which sounds obvious, but that's, like, most of the devil is in that detail. Go from idea to with end user as quickly as you can, and as repeatably as you can, so you don't want to break it every time you release. So that's the first one, is being able to ship. The second thing that you need is to be able to measure the value somehow. So you need to know if what you shipped was good or bad. So like things like, mostly that's with analytics, and looking at kind of the metrics. How many people are downloading it, how many people are signing up for a trial, how many people are using the app. But also a little bit of talking to users. And then the final thing, once you've got those two, is you can start to experiment and optimize. So A/B testing the heck out of stuff, ship the tests, measure the tests, and then optimize and repeat, really. So that's kind of the strategy that you're trying to get in place next. And again, startups tend to be quite good at that. Startups know that they're going to need to A/B test. Enterprises are less used to that. So that's usually a key piece of strategy. And again, it depends on the volume. If you've only got 10 users because you're a B2B, you don't really need a whole stack that's doing A/B testing, because even if you did test it, you wouldn't get the statistically significant numbers. Then you're better off just asking your customer, or asking your prospective customer what they want. But like if you've got a million users, then certainly you're going to be A/B testing and getting significant results there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super interesting on the enterprise side as well. How often do you see? So I mean, let's say, okay, they've started thinking, someone like you's come in and sort of opened their eyes to it. Actually, let's think of the product first. Idea, what's the aim, what you're trying to achieve, what's the product, where's the value, what's the engagement, what functionality do you actually need, then look at what tech you're going to use. When it comes to then, let's say, I'm going to make all this up, so if it doesn't make sense, do let me know, but give me a bit of slack with it. So let's say this company is a .NET enterprise. They've been doing C#.NET for their entire lives. They use Angular on the front end and Azure in the cloud, or something along those lines. But what they need and what they should be doing is, because, I don't know, for some reason, they want an app where they need a boatload of features, where actually it makes total sense to develop that in iOS native language. But they have none of those skills in-house. Do you see often people making tech choices based on the skills they already have, maybe, well, either knowing or unknowingly, then getting in trouble down the line as a result of that? Because, well, actually, if we'd thought about it, we should have just either changed our idea or accepted we're not going to get there, or hired iOS developers, in my crude example.
Yeah, I think, well, that is an interesting example as well, because, like .NET is, like there is a mobile stack in .NET, which which was Xamarin.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot of companies who are .NET focused who are now having all sorts of problems because Xamarin's been discontinued by Microsoft. It's been replaced by something called Maui, which isn't really production ready. So I've done at least one kind of strategy project on looking at people's tech stack because they've got Xamarin, and what should they do because they can't keep using Xamarin. And that was quite interesting because like looking at the skills are really important. So if you've got like in-house skills in, say, React, if you're doing React on the front end, then React Native is often a good choice for your mobile stack because of that crossover of skills. So that was a project where I went in thinking, well, like they've got this whole .NET ecosystem, they've got this existing .NET code base. Obviously, the right answer here is going to be to just kind of suck it up and go with Maui. And after doing the research, that wasn't the kind of recommendation that I made because Maui just was kind of had a lot of problems. It has a lot of open issues that aren't being resolved quickly enough, and it's hard to know at this stage whether Microsoft is really committed to that as a platform that kind of focuses on mobile. So that is a great example. I think, it's really difficult to say with a simple example because there are so many factors in that context. And that really is one of the things that I kind of specialize in doing, is going and looking at everything in someone's context to kind of help them decide what the best thing for them is. Because there's all sorts of stuff, there's the skills in-house, there's, as there's the kind of the state of the recruitment market, who's available out there. There's the kind of technologies that they've used. There's all this stuff of what level of kind of mobile engagement do people actually need. Could it just be a website? Could it just be, kind of a wrapper app? So something that you said there, Angular, .NET, that kind of lends itself a little bit to a kind of framework called Ionic, which is Ionic essentially creates what I would call a wrapper app. So that's a thin native shell which has websites kind of hosted inside it. But they're very, they're very good if you just want something fairly lightweight, just kind of wrapped up in an app. But if there's a lot of functionality, you sometimes have difficulty getting them through, particularly the Apple App Store. If it's too much like a website, they don't like that. It's quite difficult to get people to work on it because it's a bit of a pain, and so it might look from that point of view like it suits the technologies, but it might not be the like the best thing to do. The other thing that I hear a lot is like it should be a PWA, which is a progressive web app, which is just kind of some loose standards, which are essentially web apps, which on Android also do notifications, and sometimes that is the right answer, but really people come at that as I'm a techie and I want to write it really fast, so you can build a PWA really fast, but then you can't distribute it in the app stores, you can't send notifications, and if you don't need that from your product, you don't need that user engagement, then that is a much better choice for you than going full native, spend a lot more, get a lot more committed. But if you do need that, it's kind of a bit of a waste of time because you've built that thing and actually you're going to need to rebuild it. So so there is no easy answer. There is no, like I've tried, like over the last 5 years, I've had multiple guys that can build in flow charts of like, if you've got this and you've got this and you've got this, then this is the answer. You just really can't do it because there's always, there's always something slightly different. And like I said, it's really interesting going into a strategy piece. You've always got an idea of what you think the answer is going to be because obviously, like I've got that expertise. That's what I do. I've done it a lot. So you think, right, this is probably how it's going to play out. And it almost always doesn't play out like that. The more you discover, the more you learn, the more the pieces change and you end up with something different at the end. So
and I bet that's only going to get harder the more technology comes out as well, because back in the day when mobiles first took off and the whole app thing first took off, you either developed an Android app, an iOS app, or I don't know, probably a responsive web page. And those were your sort of like three options. Whereas now it's like, as you say, React Native, there's things like Ionic, there's Maui, which is ready but not ready. There's, still iOS and Android. People are using Flutter, but, really hard to get the skills. So you've got to allow people the time to train up. And it's like, well, is this suitable? It's hard to know because nobody knows with technology other than the people making the technology. This may be suitable for the next 2 years, but what about after that? But then as a company, can you look that far in the future yourself and decide? So I suppose everything, not just in mobile, but everything in tech generally, the tech you pick is a gamble, and it works for as long as it works, I suppose.
Yeah, I think what's slightly different in mobile is that, like if you build if you build a back end for a website or whatever, like there's still stuff out there that was built 20 years ago that's still running quite happily. It might be a bit of a thorn in the side and nobody wants to touch it, but like it's still there. You build it, you ship it,
Yeah.
and it kind of it's happy, it lives. You need the right OS, obviously. But with mobile, that's not the case. So with mobile, it dies. You get to a place really quickly where you can't update. Like if you haven't worked on it for even a native app, if you haven't worked on it for a couple of years, it's going to be painful kind of getting that up to the latest version. So there are really strict rules on what you can ship. You can't just build a mobile app and ship it to the stores. It has to be shipped with the right versions of iOS and Android and the right versions of the tooling. So
that's true. Actually, that's super interesting. I'd never actually thought of that, but you're forced to change it because the mobile phones change that quickly. That actually the app you built 10 years ago wouldn't run on any phone today anyway, would it? Even if the engineering was sound.
No, it wouldn't run on any phone, but also the bigger issue is that you couldn't build it anymore. So if you took that code base, you wouldn't be able to build it. Which is like that's a problem that I kind of hit early doors in that first kind of mobile kind of consultancy role, was that we were building products for customers, and like they would have quite a small app, and then 18 months later they'd come back and say, well, we just want the text changing on the front page. How much work is that? And we'd have to quote them, like that's going to be at least a week's work, and they'd be outraged. A week's work to change a word. And like it really is difficult. So after that, we learned quite quickly to keep them all on an update cycle, so that because the versions of like in iOS, the versions of iOS change, and the versions of Swift, which is the underlying language, change. So like your whole code base, especially in those early days, like you'd update and nothing would build, and it would just be like, and you still do have that, like with iOS and Android, you still do have that. Latest versions come out, you build it, doesn't look right anymore, like controls are all over the place. And it's not as much of an issue as it was, but it is. And that like those native the native stacks have that issue. So if you go native iOS and Android, they have that issue. But the cross-platform stuff is even worse, because that's built on top of the native stuff. So you've got all of those mismatches under the hood, but then you've got like the layers of dependencies on top as well. So again, very quickly you're just in a bit of a nightmare of supporting dependencies, and there's a whole scale. It's all right if you're just working on one product at once because you've got your environment set up, but if you're working on multiple, they need all sorts of different versions of things, and you need to be a real master of kind of versioning and what versions of tooling you've got and what versions of Node you've got. It's a bit of a nightmare, which is why a lot of non-mobile devs don't like doing mobile dev, because it is just so there's just all of this extra stuff that you need to deal with, rather than just like building web apps and shipping them.
Well, that must come into the education piece in a lot of your work as well, because I bet for people that don't know, startups and enterprise to a degree, it's like, well, we'll just have an app, and once the app's there, and that job is done, so to speak. But yeah, as you've described, it's a bit of a different journey. But yeah, interesting. So in terms of, I suppose, for you, in your experience, when you're developing a mobile app or you're doing something on mobile, how would you define that as having been successful? What are the sort of factors you look for where you could look at it and go, yeah, that went well?
Well, I guess the really simple one is getting it shipped to end users, because I seem to have worked on quite a lot of projects where they never they never even make it over the line.
Oh, really?
Like not so much now, I think, because people are kind of a lot more aware of it, but because I think particularly in those earlier days, people would embark on that without really realizing what was involved. You know, they did think it was like, let's just make some code and then it'll be done. And actually, there's all this other stuff and there's all this other stack around it. So the first thing is, yeah, getting it out there with people using it. But then it comes back to what I said before about the value. So measuring the success looks different for every different product, for every different team. So, you know, like, and if you've got a SaaS product, so like a subscription product like Bearable, you're never really there. You know, maybe when you exit, you know, maybe that's a sign of being there. I'm not sure, but I think the measure of success there is obviously, you know, kind of the ongoing growth in customers and that kind of thing. But for me, on my side, that ability to ship and measure and optimize, I think you can kind of feel when you get in your groove with that. And it's that ability to keep improving, fix things when they're broken, and get that piece of the workflow working. Yeah, and I suppose to some degree that's the same across most products and most, again, that's the thing, you know, like people think they can just put an app there and that'll be that. You know, if you build it, they will come. You know, it doesn't work like that. You know, like getting it launched is really just the first stage of that. You know, it's a bit, I've got an analogy where, you know, it's if you think of flying things, some people treat an app like a weather balloon, so they launch it and it's up there and occasionally it sends something back, but they don't really pay any attention. And then a lot of the kind of enterprise level apps are a bit more like gliders. So there's a bit of steering that goes on and you're kind of making sure it doesn't crash. But the ones who you know, like really driving the most value and the subscription apps are like, it's like helicopter piloting. Everything is constantly being tweaked, changed, measured, you know, like your onboarding flows, how you get people to sign up, how you get people to engage, how you get people to come back in. That is just constant. You know, it is a bit like you've got this dashboard of all these switches and, you know, like there's this team of people constantly switching and tweaking. So, so I guess there the success is the ability for us to fly that helicopter, but keep it stable, keep it kind of growing. So again, not really an easy answer, you know, like if someone wants here's the success, it's you kind of have to define that for yourself. And again, that's where I help people.
Yeah, absolutely. And how would you say, so, you know, in your experience, what you can see, this is going to be another difficult question with not a straightforward answer, because I like those. Where do you see mobile going in like the next few years? What do you see like materially changing with it? And what do you see sort of on the mobile landscape that, you know, how it might not be as big a shift as moving from like, this is just a thing that displays something to this is a product, but you know, the rate of change these days is massive that next year or the year after there could be a big shift in it. But what do you sort of see upcoming?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I already said that I thought MP3s would never catch on. So predicting the future is clearly not my thing.
So we'll put a disclaimer for people paying no attention to what you say next.
Don't make any investments. I mean, I think the trends as they are at the moment, they're going to continue. You know, I think everybody has a phone in their pocket and everybody does a lot of their stuff on their phone is going to continue. I think there's going to be big wins to be made for people who can make interacting with that phone easier. So people who can embrace, I mean, like we've got things like shortcuts on phones and it's all a bit clunky, you know, at the moment. I think for companies who can embrace, you know, potentially this new wave of AI or whatever, but to make apps easier to interact with, more context aware. You know, like I've got Hue lights, and it is a complete pain in the neck for me to have to find my phone, open that app, find the room. You know, like I just want to turn the lights on, and it's, you know, like I almost regret going down that route. So anything that companies that can make that bring that that make that easier, the better. I think as well, you know, like, so it's probably about 5 years now since most web traffic switched from a desktop to mobile. So there's more web stuff going through mobile. And there's still a lot of retail stuff, for example, that is just purely website. And if you think if you're shopping for, I don't know, clothes or shoes or whatever, anything where you've got these long lists of scrolling and it's really clunky and really slow, and you tap on a thing and then you go back and it takes you back to the start of the list, or, like all of that stuff, like Google have got so much, so many studies that show, because they've got billions of users, so they can like run a test and have results instantly. The amount of extra wait time that causes user dropout is crazy. Like it's 0.08 of a second. Like if a user has to wait, then they're gone. So you think of all that stuff that's still on the web that's probably doing quite nicely, but there's going to be kind of challenges in there who can come in and kind of cannibalize that kind of market, I think. Other stuff kind of around and about is smart speakers. That was going to be a big thing. That doesn't really feel like it is that big a thing.
No, it's similar to what you said about your light. Me trying to put my heating on through a smart speaker, literally would be quicker for me to just get up, go to the other room where the thermostat is and turn it on.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. I mean, it's great to have the discussion with the smart speaker about why it won't switch it on, but yeah, and like I can remember, it must be getting on for 5 years ago now. There was all this buzz, and we were all going to be writing these smart speaker apps, and I've never seen one come across. Like all the times I've been in consultancy and freelance, I've never seen an actual request for that. So I guess kind of in the entertainment space, it's a bit more common. But yeah, I mean, the big one is Apple's Vision Pro coming out Q1 next year. So I'm very interested to see kind of what difference that makes. So you can see now, like there's a lot of the app tech that has been coming out where I've been thinking, like, why are they doing that? Like why are they so interested in those emoji things and why? And then suddenly it's all like, oh, now I know why, because they've been doing all of this 3D, kind of their version of the metaverse and all of the gestures. Like you can just move your hand underneath the goggles and it knows, like when you're swiping through. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and kind of how that's adopted.
And I'm all for trying that. Maybe not at the price tag. Maybe I'll wait for the non-pro version to come out, which I assume they will, because given the way they name their products, and I think it'll be great. But I do think, like, is somebody missing a trick where, like, can we not just put natural language into these smart speakers so we can just talk to it and it'll just do what we want connected to our devices or what have you? Or are we done with those now and the smart speaker is dead? Actually, we've moved on to VR headsets.
I mean, with the speakers, I don't know. I guess there's a limitation. I mean, like, I'm terrified that either of us are accidentally going to say one of the names of the speakers, because mine are all going to start chipping in, and you do have that, don't you? Like they kind of they only really answer when you don't want them to. And like if they have natural language in, what if you accidentally say something? I don't know. I don't know. I wish my heating was on full because I'm really cold, and then you realise you spent thousands of pounds because your heating just came on. All that stuff. So it does seem to be a limited interface. But maybe I advise everybody to bet the opposite to what I've just said now, because that means they're going to be the next big thing.
Great. And I'll finish up, Gabby, with the last question I ask everyone. What's the best piece of advice you ever received in your career?
Yeah, so this is kind of a bit of a whimsical one, really. So I mean, like, I love getting advice. I just kind of soak it up like a sponge. But I remember someone very early in my career, I can't even remember who it was, but they said, always make sure no one needs to contact you when you're on holiday. And I actually think that's one of the best pieces of advice, not just for holidays. But I used to work in a place where it was like, if someone needed to speak to you, they would ring you like middle of the night when you were on holiday. We used to have some student interns who do kind of years out, and then when they went back to uni, it was a nightmare because they would just get called like throughout lectures and it was just crazy because someone didn't know how something worked. So the reason I think that kind of helped me was because I thought, I don't want to be contacted when I'm on holiday, and I think that made me quite good at communicating. So I would always tell people when I was going. I would always tell people where the documentation was. Documentation was really good. The code would be like commented as appropriate. People would know how it worked, and like it would always be easy to find. And I think that's stood me in good stead, because all of those practices are really good, even if you're not going on holiday. So making sure that someone else can operate your system, making sure someone else can find how stuff works, making sure someone can find the information, that everything's documented, that like whether it's code, whether it's a customer relationship, whether it's other projects. So I just think that kind of that level of organization is really, I'm sure there's been better pieces of advice, but that has just stood me in great stead. So I would recommend that to anyone. Make sure no one has to ring you when you're on holiday.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Gabby, for your time. Always a pleasure speaking to you. And I'm sure you'll be fine with anyone that wants to contact you through LinkedIn following this podcast for any further advice on anything mobile related, past, present, or future. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm always happy just to chat. So please do. You've probably seen I love talking about mobile, so that would be an absolute pleasure. But yeah, thanks very much, Esmond. I've really enjoyed talking.
Cheers, Gabby. See you.
1, 2